Welcome everybody. Welcome Mathieu. Welcome Vladislav. We are still a pretty small group, but we assume that further people are going to join in the next few minutes. This is an event organized by IoT+ Network, which is a community of companies from the IoT industry. And we work together, helping each other recruit people, find partners, identify customers, help each other out with capabilities, and also do kind of an educational part, which is partly around funding and opportunities that are in this field. And we said we want to open this up and provide an introduction. What funding opportunities are there available in Germany? On the one hand, for startups, so directly when you found your company. That's the session we've done last week. And today we are going to focus on funding for established companies. And established doesn't necessarily mean that they have been existing for ages, but we are targeting here audience of companies that are 1 year plus in terms of age. And they can get 25 to 70% funding, even retrospectively, which is amazing. And there are programs available both on federal and national level in Germany itself. And you can also go for EU funding as a complementary approach, if you like. We are going to run through a short introduction and discuss suitable strategies on how to approach funding. Going to look at what it is used for, what it can be used for, why you should use it and why not. And then focus on the how. How can you get hold of funding? Where do you find it? How do you apply for it? And how do you succeed with running the projects that you acquire funding for? And before I jump into this next slide, let me introduce myself with 2 more sentences. My name is Christopher Nigischer. I'm founder and managing director of my own company, Consider It PLC. We employ 40 people as of now in Bremen, Hamburg, and spread across the whole country since home office, actually. And we do 2 business units. The one is focusing on technology development, and I'm going to show you a use case where we used funding for ourselves in the field of technology development. And the second business unit focuses on helping companies acquire funding. So actually, we learned a lot about this space, and more parties, customers, partners asked us whether we could do similar things for them. And we said, well, why not? Let's build a business out of it. And here we are. And to put that into perspective, my company, I've been running that now for 13 years. And as I said, 40 people, so 40 people that we employ now. And we acquired 7.3 million euros of funding throughout those 13 years. So you can say something like almost 600K per year. And it was picking up speed slowly, and we had to invest a lot of time and dedicate time and passion to acquire those funds. But it pays off, and definitely having 600,000 euros available on an almost yearly basis for your engineering and development activities is a huge benefit for a company of our size. And don't get me wrong, this is not to advertise that we are so cool because we have so much funding. We are going to pay it back in terms of taxes because we built products with the funding that will be very successful, I hope. But what I want to show with that statement is that actually everybody can do that. So if you want to see funding as a mid to long-term activity that is complementary to your corporate finance activities that you need anyways, then it can be very, very rewarding. And in our case, the reward is what you see here. So it's not the whole rooftop light bar that you can see, but it's actually the black box in the middle that's built in here as an aftermarket device. So we are in the retrofitting of cars and car fleets of polices, fire departments, rescue cars. If you have a car breakdown, then ADAC comes. They are also using this system, and that are the fleets that we equip with our solution that consists of electronic software, firmware, and cloud components, and actually, cost a fortune to develop. We wouldn't have been able to go to the market with a product like that if we wouldn't have used funding. We simply wouldn't have had the money. I mean, an option would have been to give away a significant part of our equity and dilute as founders. We've chosen the funding way, which may have been a bit slower, but it was a very good fit to what we were doing here, because this market of fleet operators in the public field, like police cars, they are not the fastest clients and not the fastest ones in adopting new technologies like the ones that we provide. So when we talk about funding and put that in perspective to what you do and what you work on, always keep in mind that funding is not the fastest. Public funding is not the fastest funding instrument. It has its own rules, but if you learn and play to that rules, then that can be really actually the cheapest money that you can get, right? There's no effort in selling that you need to put in. There's some paperwork, yes, for sure. You don't dilute, you don't have to pay it back. So show me one other alternative where you have this mix of benefits like you have with public funding. So that's unique and pretty amazing. And for us, it really paid off. This is a use case that we implemented in a demo version, and it's now being rolled out across Germany, that when the ADAC, this yellow car, stops behind someone whose car broke down, it can emit a digital message and warn the upcoming traffic, and the upcoming traffic gets a warning either on their smartphone or in their driver information system, and get this visual information available and can adapt to the situation which may otherwise cause safety issues, right? And now, how to approach it? We split it in three different phases, and I'm going to refer back to this slide and to this visualization in the course of the further presentation. What we recommend in the beginning is to start with kind of low-hanging fruits. So it is advisable to pick funding mechanisms that have a good chance for you to really win them. That maybe comes with a lower funding rate, right? So you have maybe not the most favorable funding conditions. You only get 25–30% of funding for your costs, but you have a high chance of really winning the funding with 60–70, maybe 80% of winning. Why? Because if you start with something that is really demanding, the chances of winning are very low, and you will, in most of the cases, be frustrated at the end of the process and will say funding doesn't pay off. It's crap, it's just paperwork, it's slow, I don't understand it, I don't know why it didn't work. After you invested really a lot of work. And then I can understand this frustration that many people have there, but it can be that the risk of running into that frustration can be significantly reduced if you apply the right strategy and choose the right starting point. And I'm going to show you funding programs that are suitable for this approach in the next slides. And when it picks up further and you have acquired the first, let's say, 200,000 to 500,000 euros of funding, you can go further in the direction of 1 to 10 million by adding up different funding mechanisms. I mean, as I've told you, after 13 years, we are not even on the level of 1 million, so still a way to go for us as well. But larger corporations, definitely. Like if you look at the large technology companies in Germany, like for example Siemens, and I've actually done a TikTok on that a few weeks back. I just looked at the time since 2020, I think. So in 3 years, they acquired 300-something million in funding for Siemens alone. The biggest projects were around hydrogen electrolysis, and really interesting stuff what they're doing. And they're turning big wheels there in funding. They have departments of their own. So the big corporations do it because they know it pays off. The smaller ones very often don't do it because they don't have the capacity to do it, or they don't know about these opportunities. And that's what we want to heal with activities like this presentation, to give more awareness to that topic, provide more awareness on the topic, and make more people ask for funding. And by the way, as I see, there is at least there's this comment signal. If you have questions, either raise your hand. We are a small group, so we can take this very interactively. If you have questions, raise your hand, and I'm gonna invite you to talk, or put a message into the chat, and we're gonna have you join. Sorry for confusing with the slides. We continue with a short look at what is funding being used for, and that can very easily be answered is, if you acquire funding, it typically leads to you and your company doing more research and development, Forschung und Entwicklung, F&E. or hire new staff in that field. And that's actually what is really intended also by the government, that they support funding for innovation because they know it leads to more information. More innovation is good for the wealth of the nation and for our society as a whole. Yeah, simply progress, more value creation in the future, more taxes for the state, and more benefits for the people. And if you look at funding today, it makes sense to combine two perspectives. One, the retrospective perspective, looking back at what you maybe have been doing since 2020. There you can at least get 25% funding via this instrument called Forschungszulage. Or you look in the future and you do the paperwork first, and then you can get up to 70% of funding in this space, which is called Projektförderung. That simply means that every federal state and every national ministry has some funding programs running with which they support and promote the key topics in their political agenda. And by the way, I consciously decided to keep the slides in German because the funding language in Germany is still German. And my hope is that it's easier for you to jump into working with that paper if you already have it in the right language. So I hope it's easy to follow, even because I'm presenting it in English. But the written word should be more usable in German, I hope. Okay, we already have seen the slide. It's a slightly different perspective. I've already told about this mix of chances of getting funding and funding conditions. So I'm not going to elaborate on that again, but take you to the main criteria that you need to fulfill when you want to acquire funding, especially funding for innovation for your company. You always have to describe the goals that you have, what you want to achieve. You need to describe the work plan that you have in mind. That's very important to make your project credible, because typically the evaluators have a good understanding of how much work something is. So if you want to achieve something significant and you only put in very little work, then that will lead to questions or even to you being turned down with your proposal. So there must be a fit. And funding is not about convincing a client that you are the cheapest, the best alternative. It is convincing the state that you are a good investment, that putting the money in your company makes sense for the society. So it's not marketing speech, not this typical salesy marketing speech. It's a funding marketing, to put it that way. You also need to refer to the requirements that are being put up, and you need to show that you can fulfill and comply with them. And maybe the most important requirement that you will find in almost every funding project is that you need to show that there are risks associated with your project. And typically that is about technical risks. So it's not about data privacy, for example, or about profitability of your business model. It's about technical risks, like if I want to build a bridge, for example, can I do that based on a certain foundation? Will it be steady enough for the payload that should run over this bridge, and so on? So these are technical risks that need to be described. They must be complete and credible, so that you have a high chance of funding. And if you can describe these risks, then typically you will also be able to easily describe the novelty that you have in mind, the innovation, because to a large extent, innovation is characterized by something new which hasn't been achieved so far, because there are still some remaining risks that nobody has tackled yet, and you're the first one to solve this specific combination of risks and intention, and that makes you eligible for the funding. That is what I wanted to say on the main criteria that your funding proposal needs to fulfill. And then let's jump into some funding programs that are available. So we have FZG, which is short for Forschungszulage, this retrospective funding that I was mentioning. You can get up to 1 million per year, and you get 25% funding rate on payroll costs and 15% on external costs like freelancers or subcontractors. And you have a very high chance of getting the funding, more than 80%, and the Aufwand the effort that you need to invest is pretty low on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the biggest effort. It's a 2. So that's really unbeatable, unbeatably easy to get. And as you can see, and maybe you wouldn't have expected that, on the other end of the scale, we see the Landes, the federal programs like Profit in Berlin, for example. They typically come with a lot of payload workload in the proposal phase. And in between, we have the national programs like ZIM and KI for KMU, KMU Innovativ, data programs dedicated to SMEs. So whether you're a startup or a small, medium enterprise, you can apply for that. And they have still a moderately good chance of you winning, with 64% in ZIM, Zentrales Innovationsprogramm Mittelstand, and 15 to 20% in these other programs. So you see there the attractiveness. Also, if you take into account that you have a 7.5 effort, so it's pretty hard. Chances are not the best, and okay, yes, the funding rate is pretty good, the highest that we can find in this line, with up to 70%. But put that in context with the chance of getting it and the effort to acquire it. So that makes these programs much more comparable than they look at first sight. Again, the hint: if there are questions, raise your hand or drop me a short line, and I'm gonna answer them. And let me shortly jump back to this picture. We are now going to focus on the first phase, on this foundations, basics, Grundlagen phase of our funding journey. And we recommend to initially look at these two programs: ZIM for future projects, so that which you haven't yet started with, because typically funding has exactly that necessity. You first need to run through the paperwork, then you can start creating costs and getting reimbursed for that. If you start too early, then that can harm your chances of getting the funding. So you need 3, maybe 4 months of buffer time ahead of the project start to run through this application for funding in programs like Zentrales Innovationsprogramm Mittelstand. And it's important to keep in mind that there's a certain urgency about that. Because if you defer the work on the funding proposal, with every day that goes by, you lose the chance for funding money, right? Because probably you will already have people on your payroll, and before you have the so-called Zuwendungsbescheid or grant agreement in your hands, you can't invoice these people's time and cost against a funding scheme. And that's what we want to achieve as fast as possible, that this is possible, so that you can reduce your cost structure. And Forschungszulage, on the other hand, is a retrospective instrument. So there, anyways, you first have to spend the money, and then you have up to 4 years of time to get it back. These 25% for payroll costs, 15% of external costs. And you see the chance of getting it with 80% is really tremendously high. Both programs are open for any kind of technology and industry, which is nice. And there is no cutoff date, where in other programs, typically they say you need to submit your proposal until 15th of October. So that's, for example, an upcoming cutoff date in many programs. That's different here. You can apply for ZIM and Forschungszulage at any time, whenever you like. Now, if you look at the next stage, so we assume that we have successfully acquired ZIM and Forschungszulage. We have kicked off the project. So we have currently 2-3 people paid by funded projects. We can go for the next step, which is called Bundesliga. So here it's about the pros. And there you should typically put some consideration in your funding roadmap. And funding roadmap is not a purpose in itself. It's tightly linked. It should be tightly linked to your innovation roadmap. So you describe and lay down the projects that you plan on the mid and long-term future, and then you can start aligning it with funding opportunities that either are already there, like Forschungszulage and ZIM are always there, and funding opportunities that come up periodically, and where there's it's similar to a tender process. You have a public notice. We have created this funding opportunity. We want to fund projects that deal with X, Y, Z. And then you typically have 3 to 4 months to react to that call with a proposal that is then in the competition with all the others who want to get hold of the money, and you simply need to provide the best proposal with the best fit with the funding criteria to make it work in your way. Yes, on this funding roadmap, it makes sense to have an overview of funding opportunities and how they fit together with what you want to do in your projects. I don't recommend to acquire for funding just for the sake of getting funding. You should acquire funding for things that you plan to do anyways. Then funding makes most sense. It reduces your cost structure and is really helpful in also networking you with funding authorities, other companies that are acquiring for funding. So it's not just about the money. To me, I would even say the bigger benefit that you can derive from funding is the networking effect, and that you are working together with other companies across company borders, also with academia, for example. And that can be very fruitful. You develop new ideas, you get insight into the value chain and how it works together and who does what and who provides what. So that is really what makes funding so valuable in my perspective. If you think about where can I find these different funding opportunities, and now I was drawing up 5 different alternatives that are the kind of evergreen programs, so you can apply for them almost any time. Where can I find these specific tender-based programs? And one source is further Finder, a simple scraping and search engine that we developed that gives you really convenient filtering mechanisms. We can say, okay, I just want to see funding that is relevant for my company in Berlin. I don't want to see the ones for Brandenburg or Mecklenburg. And what you can also do is you can create a funding alert. So when you leave your email address in this system, further-finder.de, and everybody can use that for free, and leave your email address, then it will send you out an alert and say, here's a notification, something has changed, look at it, that is an interesting opportunity for you, and it fits your criteria. So we create this funding roadmap, and to do that, we should prioritize the needs that we have. So also amongst your innovation activities, there will be more and less important activities. Be aware of that and make that transparent, because that should be an additional input factor in making the right decisions on which funding programs to put in your portfolio of activities that you want to apply for. Then you develop the project, and don't underestimate this part. It takes some time to identify, especially if we talk about funding that you apply for in consortia, where the requirement is that you have, for example, one academic partner, one SME, and one large corporation, or maybe 2 SMEs and one large corporation. Then you will need to find these partners that complement what you can achieve, and this takes some time. You need to build trust if you don't know them upfront. So being present in this ecosystem and also go to events where new funding programs are being introduced is very helpful. And there's a collection of links that I'm gonna show on the next slide. Here it is, where you can also register for newsletters and stuff like that, and then can simply have the information and the invitations provided to your inbox where you should turn to. Okay, that's for developing the projects. And then what are typical fails and wins that we experience in our own work and in our work with clients on a regular basis? So as true as it is simple, read the funding, what is it called? The funding rules, yeah. Be very aware of what the funding authorities expect. They will put that in writing and make that information available. You need to read and understand it, and if it's not understandable, then ask. It's advisable to have the first paragraphs created in a way that after reading them, the reader should have an understanding of what the project is about. Otherwise, the risk of losing him, the reader, the evaluator, is pretty high. So whatever refers to good writing practice also refers to funding proposals. be aware of that and make sure that if you're not the best writer, then get some help. It really pays off. On the vocabulary, I'm gonna not go into too many details. I show you typical fails that we see also in our own work. Eternally long sentences are a killer. You read 5 lines, at the end of line 5, you don't know what was being written in line 1. Not being accurate enough, like putting content in the wrong chapters, something we encounter on a regular basis, and going too far in either direction, be it presenting the whole thing on a way too technical basis, is as bad as presenting in too application-oriented dimension. The first indicates that it's not mature enough to put money into it. The later is a sign that you maybe don't really need the funding, so why provide you with that? Let's go for more attractive alternatives then. This is the collection of links that you can use. I put together referrals to the most important funding programs that I was introducing in the presentation, and then also some of the largest federal, also Bundesland Förderprogramme for some of the federal states here in Germany. And then what are reasons now to almost wrap it up already? Why not more organizations apply for funding? And you may encounter or may understand that some of these may also apply to you. And this is a study that was being done at the end of 2022 regarding innovation funding. Most of the companies said that they simply don't have the information that they need to make an informed decision, and that they are insecure of whether or not their research and development activity is fundable, is eligible. And then different funding programs are not known about, and there's a lack of resources to really do the application work, which I can understand. Typically, if you're growing as a company, then it's not your first priority to grow your funding team. You will have other priorities, but also looking at what you can do in the funding department is definitely helpful. And challenges: when you have decided and started the process of writing a grant proposal, then you will be in best society if you experience that describing the content of the R&D work in an adequate way is pretty hard. It's a lot of work. Finding the right abstraction layer, if it's not your daily business, then yes, that can be painful. Finding the right structure for work plan, financial and people staffing plan. Putting in the data, keeping in the length structure. So very often you will find indications like only write a maximum of 10 pages and not more. Page number 11 is already not going to be read anymore. Hopefully the other 10 pages are read. So that's, yeah. If they provide you with a limit in terms of length, keep it. And that takes me to the end of this short presentation with a lot of information. I think the presentation is also going to be shared so that with the links you can work with them. If you come to the conclusion that after all I've said, it's still advisable to have a conversation, see how I can more individually help you, then please don't be shy of booking an appointment via this link. I thank you, Jackie, for putting the Förderfinder link in the chat. So that is already there as well. So sorry, too fast. I wanted to say, if you want to talk to me, use this link. Let's jump on a call. Let's sort things out. I can help you finding the right way through the funding jungle and not investing too much time for too long into a wrong direction. And besides that, if there are any questions on any of the topics I've mentioned throughout the talk, or if you have general questions, you say, I'm interested in X, Y, Z, put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we're going to have you jump in the call and discuss your question with us and get you an answer. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative and is helpful for your future activities. Thank you. Thank you.